Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 5 and pretty much see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now, I wouldn't recommend buying this phone at all. It's severely outdated, but it's still very interesting to see how this phone holds up about 7 years later. Wow, time is flying. This phone originally came out in 2015, and this phone was the flagship of that time. Now, it's very strange. Samsung has since been removed from the Note lineup. They haven't really made another Note lineup phone since the Note 20, but what's very weirder is that they've actually went ahead and made phones like the Galaxy S22 Ultra that has really taken from the Note lineup. So even though the Note lineup, there's no Note rebrand, it still is alive by the S lineup, which I think is really smart. They kind of combine both lineups and they pretty much make one phone, and they've always been more aligned than different. Now, one thing that, back in 2015, when this phone came out, when I thought to myself of probably the biggest, baddest flagship of that time, it was usually the Galaxy Notes. It was usually the iPhones and the Notes. It seems like Samsung just put everything they had inside of their Galaxy Note lineup over really every other device. But when they made the Note 5, this was the weirdest transition I've ever seen them do. It was the exact same thing when they did the Galaxy S6 as well. They used to be the phone, when I used to think about a phone that really you could do anything with, and you could just take apart and put together and, customizable storage and, battery, all this stuff. They enclosed so much at one point that it really kind of disrupted and it completely changed the whole entire way you looked at a Galaxy phone in general. Not only did they go ahead and remove the expandable storage, they removed the removable back, and they removed the battery as well. Well, they removed the removable battery, and those things were just insane. And when I look back at this moment from Samsung, this was probably the first in many moves that Samsung made in the Note lineup that just completely flopped that line. And I think them removing the Note line is probably one of the smartest things ever, because many people forget that the successor of this phone, the Note 7, had that humongous explosion of a debacle that happened with it, and that was also very bad for the Note lineup. And I think ever since then, they never really were able to kind of recover that lineup. I think the Note 9, they did an excellent job, and then with the Note 10, and they started making two different Note phones, that was also kind of a flop, and then people probably stopped buying it. But I think the Note 20 Ultra was an excellent phone in my opinion. With the Galaxy Note 5, this was a phone that pretty much started the trend of the Note lineup kind of having this domino effect of just being a little weird, and that's honestly something that's very strange. On the front of the Note 5, we had a 5.7-inch Super AMOLED display, and it was a 1440p panel. By far, probably one of the best panels of the 2015 era. I'm trying to think back, probably the Galaxy S6 is up there too, but the Note 5's panel was amazing. It still holds up very well. Mine has a little bit of burn-in on it, but it's a very good panel. It's still hard to find panels this good in this day and age. I take that back. You have 120Hz panels and stuff, which are really good, but 1440p back in 2015, that's pretty impressive. You had the capacitive keys and home button on the bottom. On the very bottom, you had the micro USB port, headphone jack, and an S Pen as well, which is really cool. An S Pen is a stylus, so I think most people know this by now, but it was another really cool thing that Samsung threw in this phone that a lot of other people also kind of looked at as well, and honestly, it was a really cool thing. On the back, though, we had this glass back, which, again, when you feel this phone in the hand, it feels very premium. It still feels like $1,000 phone, but they went ahead and pretty much removed that removable back, which was very sad. I personally didn't feel like they had to do that. I feel like they could have kept the plastic backs on this phone and the S6, but it is what it is. Again, there's not really much we can do about it at this point, but I feel like they could have done something a little bit better in that specific standpoint as well. So in that specific situation, that kind of covers it up on the outside. Now, a few other things, we did have wireless charging on this phone, which was cool. We had that camera on the back, which is nice as well. And speaking about that camera, it was a single 16 megapixel wide angle lens. Now, I do think in this day and age, that's not a bad camera. You could do 4K at 30. You had a 5 megapixel front facing camera that you could do 1440p videos on. And when I look back at this lens, as I mentioned before, again, not a bad camera by any means. I feel like this camera still holds up kind of decently. I don't want to give the impression that you can still use this phone's camera, because you cannot. You can. It's not amazing and it's not going to wow anybody, but for it being the 2015 flagship, it's pretty much what you'd expect as of this point. Now, I will say for this type of camera holding up in this day and age, if you want to use applications like Snapchat and all those other ones, you may have a little bit of a tricky situation, mostly because this phone is somewhat outdated. A lot of applications may not be able to be downloaded on this phone, but on top of that, a lot of applications may not be able to, access this camera at the highest capability. So, apps like Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram, if you're using the built-in camera here, it may not give you the best features, but the stock camera actually has quite a few features built in. And that is something I've always seen about, Samsung phones. They throw everything inside of that camera at one moment, and I still think that is a really cool thing that Samsung did. So, in my opinion, the camera quality here, thumbs up for me from back in 2015. I don't think it holds up that much anymore, but it's still a very cool thing that Samsung did when they made a camera like this. Now, another big thing to keep in mind is that this phone, as I mentioned before, is severely outdated with software. So this phone is not going to be getting any more updates anytime soon. It pretty much stopped getting updates a few years ago, so it makes even less sense to buy something like this. Again, I don't want to be the person who just keeps saying, well, it's an old phone, so it's worthless. This phone still has some capability, but it's just not a good idea to go and buy this phone if you're in that situation where this device is, your main, priority, and if you're using a phone like this, it's just going to be outdated. So that's pretty much it. I mean, when you look at it that standpoint, it's pretty obvious that this phone is not going to be holding too well in that standpoint either. Now, performance-wise, this device inside of it had that Exynos 7420 octa chipset inside, an octa-core CPU, and 4GB of RAM on every single model of this device. Now, as I mentioned before with this type of phone, again, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's not going to be the fastest thing ever. This thing was still running TouchWiz, I believe. The new Android 7, I think, was when it stopped. And so, again, you're not going to be getting a fast phone. And I hate just keep having to bring it up, but I will say from back in 2015, this was probably one of the fastest phones of all time. But I do look at other phones like its competitors, like the iPhone 6s Plus, and I believe the Nexus 6P of that time as well. I could be totally wrong, but I feel like those phones held up a lot better. Well, maybe not the 6P, but I feel like the iPhone 6s Plus held up better overall than the Galaxy Note 5 in terms of a performance and stability standpoint. I could do another follow-up comparison between these two because it'd be kind of interesting to see how both these have kind of held up. But after using the 6s Plus for many years now, and for the Note 5, for me being around this, phone and owning it for a few years too, I just feel like the 6s Plus held up a little bit better. The Note 5 is not a bad phone, and I don't want to give the impression that this phone is unusable, but it just is a severely outdated phone when it comes down to it. Another thing Samsung did at this moment was actually decrease the battery size from its successor or its predecessor, and they actually gave us, like I said before, a housed-in battery. The battery inside was 3,000 milliamp hours, and it's very interesting because back in 2015, that was the biggest Samsung thought they could put here. If you look at a lot of phones nowadays, like the Pixel 6a that just dropped, that phone actually has a bigger size battery than this thing, and that is in a pretty much a smaller form factor. It's like a budget tier phone now, and it's a cheap phone compared to this one. So it's very interesting to see how things and movements are changing like this, and kind of, I will be honest, when it comes down to it, the Galaxy Note 5, in my opinion, isn't really worth it anymore. I don't think it's one of those phones that you should buy. If you want to buy it as like a, collector's item, or you want to just kind of check it out, then, go for it. It doesn't really make much sense not to buy it, but it just doesn't make any sense to buy a phone like this if you're trying to go ahead and get a device that is supposed to be here today and be here tomorrow. With this type of device, it's already outdated. It was outdated yesterday, so there's really no point in buying it anymore. So that's kind of how I would cover it up. I like this phone. I think it's pretty cool, but it really just doesn't make any sense to buy this type of phone anymore, in my opinion. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.